Galaxy watches a trial. Earth brings its defenders in chains and flames. Captain Rosalie Brenner stood at the massive reinforced viewport of the prison transport Defiance, watching as the Galactic Tribunal Station grew larger against the star-filled darkness. The station was a monument to justice, or so the Galactic Council claimed. Its crystalline spires stretched for kilometers, housing the most advanced courtroom technology in known space. "First time seeing the Tribunal Station?" asked Lieutenant Commander Kai Rodriguez, joining her at the viewport. His voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too much in his 35 years. "First time bringing war criminals to it," Rosalie replied, her jaw tightening. Behind them, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the corridor as their prisoners were escorted to holding cells. Kai's dark eyes hardened. "War criminals. That's what they're calling our people now." The prisoners weren't ordinary criminals. They were Earth's finest, soldiers, tacticians, and commanders who had fought in humanity's bloodiest conflict, the Terran-Kasari War, a war that had ended 3 months ago with Earth's surrender and a demand from the Galactic Council for accountability. "Captain," came the voice of Communications Officer Luna Torres over the intercom, "the Tribunal Station is requesting permission to dock. They're also transmitting the trial schedule." "Put it through to my console," Rosalie ordered, moving to the command chair. The data scrolled across her screen, making her stomach tighten. 47 human defendants. Charges ranging from violation of interstellar law to crimes against sentient beings. At the top of the list was General Nathan Cross, the man who had held the Kepler defense line for 6 months against impossible odds. Below him were Colonel Raven Mitchell, the architect of the Titan Station evacuation that had saved 2 million civilians, and Commander Derek Phoenix, whose tactical brilliance had prevented the complete annihilation of the Earth Defense Fleet. "These aren't war criminals," muttered Chief Engineer Tobias Kane, reading over her shoulder. "These are heroes." "Heroes who lost," Rosalie said quietly, "and in the Galaxy's eyes, that makes all the difference." The Defiance shuddered slightly as the docking clamps engaged. Through the viewport, Rosalie could see representatives from dozens of alien species gathering in the station's observation decks. The trial would be broadcast across known space, a show of the Galactic Council's justice system. "Captain," Luna's voice came again, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Earth Command. My quarters? Route it there." Minutes later, Rosalie found herself staring at the tired face of Admiral Rebecca Stone on her private communication screen. The Admiral had aged years in the past few months. "Rosalie," the Admiral began without preamble, "I know what you're thinking. Hell, we're all thinking it. But orders are orders. Admiral, with respect, we're delivering Earth's best to what amounts to a public execution." Admiral Stone's expression didn't change. "The peace treaty requires full cooperation with the Tribunal. If we refuse, the Kasari get their way. Complete occupation of Earth." Rosalie clenched her fists. The Kasari were a warrior species that had swept through 3 star systems before setting their sights on humanity. Their technology was superior, their numbers vast, and their concept of mercy non-existent. Only the intervention of the Galactic Council had prevented Earth's complete destruction. "The defendants know what they're facing," Admiral Stone continued. "They volunteered for this. Every single one of them could have fled to the outer colonies, but they chose to stay and face trial. Because they know running would make all of humanity look guilty," Rosalie said bitterly. "Because they know someone has to stand for what we did," the Admiral corrected. "Right or wrong, those decisions were made to save human lives. Now they'll defend those decisions before the galaxy." The communication ended, leaving Rosalie alone with her thoughts. She made her way to the detention section, where the most secure cells held humanity's accused. General Cross sat calmly in his cell, reading a digital tablet. He looked up as she approached, a man in his 50s with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen too much combat. "Captain Brenner," he said, standing respectfully, "how long until we dock?" 15 minutes, sir." Rosalie hesitated. "General, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you regret it? The Sigma Centauri incident?" Cross was quiet for a long moment. The Sigma Centauri incident was the primary charge against him. the orbital bombardment of a Kasari supply depot that had also destroyed a civilian refugee camp. 12,000 alien refugees had died alongside the military targets. "Every day," he said finally. "But if I had to do it again, knowing what I know now, I'd make the same choice." "Sir?" "Those supply depots were launching the assault on New Geneva. 2 million human colonists, Captain, including my daughter and grandson." His voice remained steady, but she could see the pain in his eyes. 12,000 lives to save 2 million. It's mathematics, but that doesn't make it easier to live with. In the next cell, Colonel Mitchell looked up from her own reading. She was younger than Cross, with short-cropped auburn hair and burn scars along her left arm from the Battle of Titan Station. "The Kasari don't take prisoners, Captain," Mitchell said. "They don't have refugee camps or civilian protections in their military doctrine. When they attack a colony, everything dies. Men, women, children, even the livestock and pets." "But we're supposed to be better than that," Rosalie said. "We tried to be." Commander Phoenix spoke up from the third cell. He was the youngest of the 3 senior officers, barely 40, with prematurely white hair from the stress of command. "For 2 years, we followed every rule of engagement. We gave warnings before attacks, we allowed evacuation time, we treated prisoners according to Galactic law." "And?" Rosalie asked. "And we lost 17 colonies and 40 million people," Phoenix said quietly. "The Kasari used our mercy against us. Every warning we gave them time to prepare. Every evacuation window they used to reinforce their positions. Every prisoner we treated humanely, gave them intelligence about our weaknesses." The docking process completed with a shudder that ran through the ship. Soon, Rosalie knew she would have to hand over these people to alien justice. "Captain," came Luna's voice over the intercom, "the tribunal is requesting immediate transfer of all prisoners." "Acknowledged. Begin transfer procedures." The next hour was a blur of security protocols and formal procedures. The defendants were escorted through the docking tube in full restraints, flanked by both human guards and alien security forces. Rosalie watched from the observation deck as her charges were led away, wondering if she would see any of them alive again. The Galactic Tribunal chamber was unlike anything humanity had built. The room was vast, with seating for thousands of observers arranged in concentric circles around a central platform. Advanced holographic displays showed every angle of the proceedings to viewers across the galaxy. Rosalie took her place in the human delegation section, alongside other Earth Defense Force officers who had come to witness the trial. Across the chamber, she could see representatives from dozens of species. Some she recognized, others completely alien. The Kasari delegation sat in a place of honor, their reptilian forms imposing even at rest. Their leader, War Commander Thaxel, was a massive creature with scarred hide and eyes like molten gold. He had personally led the assault on Earth's outer colonies. At precisely 0900 Standard Galactic Time, the trial began. The chief arbiter was a Zenthari, a species known for their analytical minds and supposed impartiality. Its crystalline body reflected the chamber's lights as it spoke in perfectly modulated tones. This tribunal convenes to examine charges of war crimes committed by members of the Terran species during the recent conflict with the Kasari hegemony, the arbiter announced. The defendants stand accused of violating the Galactic Accords on the conduct of war, specifically the prohibitions against targeting civilian populations and the use of excessive force. The first defendant called was General Cross. He walked to the central platform with military bearing, his restraints removed for the proceedings. The charges against him were read in multiple languages: the destruction of the Sigma Centauri refugee camp, the orbital bombardment of 3 Kasari worlds, and the authorization of chemical weapons use in the Vega system. "General Nathan Cross," the arbiter intoned, "how do you answer these charges?" Cross stood straight, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. "I acknowledge my actions, but I do not acknowledge guilt. Every decision I made was to protect human lives in the face of an enemy that showed no mercy to our civilians." A ripple of sound went through the chamber, alien voices expressing disapproval. The Kasari delegation hissed in what Rosalie assumed was anger. The prosecutor was a Valdorian, a species known for their legal expertise. Its blue-tinted skin seemed to shimmer as it approached the evidence display. "General Cross," the prosecutor began, Are you aware that galactic law expressly forbids the targeting of civilian populations, regardless of military necessity? I am aware of galactic law, Cross replied. I am also aware that the Kasari do not follow it. They targeted our civilians from the first day of the war. That does not excuse your actions. It explains them, Cross said firmly. When facing an enemy that recognizes no rules, following rules becomes a path to extinction. The prosecutor activated the holographic display, showing images from Sigma Centauri. The refugee camp had been built adjacent to the Kasari supply depot, close enough that the orbital bombardment had incinerated both targets. These were non-combatants, General. Families. Children. Cross's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. Those refugees were from worlds the Kasari had conquered. They were being held as forced labor, building the very weapons being used against human colonies. They were still civilians. Were they? Cross stepped closer to the display. When the Kasari conquered human colonies, they didn't distinguish between civilians and military. They killed everyone. Our intelligence indicated these refugees were being forced to produce military supplies. Were they civilians, or were they slaves being used as a human shield? The chamber erupted in voices, some supporting Cross, others condemning him. The Arbiter called for order. General, the prosecutor continued when quiet returned, even if your assessment was correct, galactic law requires verification and alternative solutions before such extreme measures. Alternative solutions? Cross's voice rose for the first time. We tried alternative solutions for 2 years. We sent warnings, we offered prisoner exchanges, we attempted diplomatic contact. The Kasari response was to accelerate their extermination campaigns. He gestured toward the Kasari delegation. Ask War Commander Thaxul how many warnings he gave the families on Kepler 7 before his forces glassed the entire planet. Ask him about the children's hospitals on New Beijing that his ships targeted specifically. Thaxul rose from his seat, his massive form imposing. When he spoke, his voice was like grinding stone. Human weakness is not our concern. You fight or you die. That is the way of strength. Exactly. Cross turned back to the tribunal. The Kasari see mercy as weakness. Every rule we followed gave them tactical advantage. Every civilian we protected became a target they could use against us. The prosecutor moved to the next charge. General, explain your authorization of chemical weapons in the Vega system. Cross was silent for a moment, his expression pained. The Kasari had taken Vega Colony and were using the colonists as forced labor in their shipyards. Our intelligence indicated they were planning to use those ships to attack Earth directly. So you deployed nerve gas that killed over 50,000 beings. 50,000 beings who were already dead, Cross said quietly. The Kasari were working them to death in those shipyards. Our reconnaissance showed mass graves, starvation, disease. We had 2 choices. Let them die slowly while building ships to destroy more human worlds, or end their suffering quickly while preventing those ships from being completed. That was not your choice to make. Whose choice was it? Cross's voice turned cold. The Galactic Council's? Where was the Council when the Kasari started this war? Where were the peacekeepers when human colonies were being exterminated? Rosalie felt a chill as Cross continued. It was a question that had haunted humanity throughout the war. Why had the Galactic Council remained neutral for so long? The Council did not abandon humanity, the prosecutor said, but there was less conviction in its voice. Didn't you? Cross looked around the chamber. For 18 months, the Council debated and discussed while human worlds burned. You called for restraint and diplomacy while the Kasari committed genocide. When you finally intervened, it wasn't to stop the slaughter, it was to prevent humanity from winning. The accusation hung in the air like a physical presence. Rosalie could see alien representatives shifting uncomfortably in their seats. General Cross, the Arbiter interrupted, you will confine your statements to the charges against you. The charges against me exist because I refused to let my species be exterminated while the galaxy watched, Cross replied. Every action I took, every difficult decision was made to save human lives when no one else would. The prosecutor moved to dismiss Cross, but the general wasn't finished. I want the record to show something, Cross said, his voice carrying across the silent chamber. In 30 years of military service, I never wanted to hurt innocent people. Every civilian death weighs on my conscience. But I would rather carry that weight than explain to the ghosts of 2 billion humans why I followed rules that the enemy ignored. As Cross was escorted back to his holding area, Colonel Mitchell was called forward. Her charges were different, but equally serious. The forced evacuation of Titan Station, which had resulted in the deaths of thousands of alien workers who couldn't be evacuated in time. Colonel Mitchell, the prosecutor began, explain your decision to evacuate only human personnel from Titan Station before its destruction. Mitchell's scarred face showed no emotion. Titan Station was a research facility with a mixed population. When our long-range sensors detected the Kasari assault fleet, we had 6 hours before their arrival. You had transport capacity for all personnel. We had transport capacity for all human personnel, Mitchell corrected. The alien workers on the station included several species with specific environmental requirements. The Aquarians needed pressurized water tanks, the methane breathers required specialized atmosphere controls, and the silicon-based life forms needed extreme temperature regulation. So you left them to die? I made a choice based on survival mathematics, Mitchell said. We could evacuate 2 million humans in the time available, or we could attempt to evacuate everyone and lose most of the population when the Kasari arrived. The prosecutor displayed evacuation records. Your logs show you didn't even attempt a full evacuation. Because I knew it was impossible, Mitchell replied. I'd run the evacuation scenarios dozens of times during emergency drills. Full evacuation would have taken 14 hours minimum. We had 6. You could have tried. And failed, resulting in the death of everyone on the station. Mitchell's voice hardened. I chose to save 2 million lives instead of losing 3 million trying to save everyone. That was not your decision to make. Whose decision was it? Mitchell demanded. The station administrator was dead, killed in the first Kasari probe attack. The Galactic emergency response team was 12 hours away. I was the ranking military officer, and I had 6 hours to save as many lives as possible. The chamber was quiet as Mitchell continued. I personally stayed behind to help coordinate the evacuation of alien personnel to the most secure areas of the station. When the Kasari arrived, I fought alongside those who couldn't be evacuated. I was prepared to die with them. But you survived. I was rescued by a human patrol that violated orders to return for me, Mitchell said. They saved my life, and I've spent every day since wondering if I made the right choice. The prosecutor pressed on. Colonel, do you regret your decision? Mitchell was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I regret that it was necessary, but given the same circumstances, I would make the same choice. 2 million lives saved is better than 3 million lives lost. Commander Phoenix was the last of the primary defendants. His charges centered on the Battle of Wolf 359, where his tactical decisions had resulted in the destruction of a Kasari hospital ship that was later revealed to be carrying civilian refugees. Commander Phoenix, the prosecutor began, explain your decision to target what your own sensors identified as a medical vessel. Phoenix looked younger than his 40 years as he stood at the defendant's platform. The vessel in question was broadcasting medical identification codes, but it was also electronically jamming our communications and launching what appeared to be sensor probes toward our fleet positions. Hospital ships are allowed to carry defensive equipment, not offensive sensor arrays and communication jammers, Phoenix replied. Our tactical analysis indicated the vessel was gathering intelligence for the Kasari fleet while using its medical status as cover. The prosecutor displayed sensor logs from the battle. Your own records show you fired without attempting communication. Communication was impossible due to the jamming, Phoenix said, and we were in the middle of active combat. The Kasari fleet was pressing a full assault, and we detected what appeared to be a spy ship in our formation. So you destroyed it. I gave the order to disable it, Phoenix corrected. Our weapons were set to minimum power, targeting engines and communication arrays. The ship's destruction was caused by secondary explosions from onboard systems. Systems that wouldn't have exploded if you hadn't attacked. Phoenix's composure cracked slightly. You want to know what I regret? I regret that the Kasari used sick and wounded refugees as cover for their intelligence operations. I regret that they built their spy ship to look exactly like a medical vessel. I regret that their tactics forced me to choose between protecting my fleet and risking civilian lives. He paused, then continued more quietly. But I don't regret protecting the 200,000 people on the ships under my command. That hospital ship was feeding targeting data to the Kasari fleet. If I had ignored it, every human ship in that battle group would have been destroyed. The prosecutor moved to conclude its case. Commander, you were trained in Galactic rules of engagement. You knew the protocols for dealing with medical vessels. I was trained to protect human lives, Phoenix replied. The Galactic rules of engagement assume your enemy follows the same rules. When facing an enemy that uses medical ships as spy platforms and refugee camps as human shields, those rules become tools for their victory and our destruction. As the prosecution concluded its case against the primary defendants, Rosalie felt a growing sense of dread. The evidence was overwhelming. Humans had violated multiple aspects of galactic law, but the context painted a different picture entirely. The defense phase began with a surprise. Instead of calling expert witnesses or presenting technical evidence, the human legal team called War Commander Thaxul to the stand. The massive Kasari leader approached the platform with predatory grace, his golden eyes scanning the chamber with barely concealed contempt. War Commander, the defense attorney began, you led the Kasari assault on human space. How many human colonies did your forces attack? 37, Thaxul replied without hesitation. And how many of those attacks gave advance warning to civilian populations? Warning is weakness. The strong take what they need. How many human prisoners did your forces take during the war? Thaxul's reptilian features shifted in what might have been amusement. Prisoners are resources that require food and guarding. We took what was useful and eliminated the rest. So you took no prisoners? Humans make poor slaves. Too fragile, too emotional. Better to eliminate them and take their worlds. A shocked silence fell over the chamber. Even some of the alien observers seemed disturbed by Thaxul's casual admission of genocide. War Commander, the defense attorney continued, did your forces distinguish between military and civilian targets? All humans are potential warriors. Eliminating their spawn prevents future resistance. You targeted children. I targeted future enemies, Thaxul said, his voice showing no emotion. Human offspring grow into human warriors, logical to eliminate the problem at its source. The defense attorney turned to the tribunal. The defendants have been accused of violating the laws of war, but those laws assume both sides recognize and follow them. When facing an enemy that considers genocide a legitimate military tactic, how can adherence to those laws be anything but suicide? The prosecutor objected, but the damage was done. Thaxul's testimony had revealed the true nature of the conflict. Not a war between two civilized species, but a desperate struggle for survival against an enemy that recognized no limits. The defense called its next witness, Dr. Amelia Voss, Earth's leading xenobiologist and cultural expert. She had studied the Kasari for 20 years before the war. Dr. Voss, the defense attorney began, in your professional opinion, was it possible to conduct conventional warfare against the Kasari? No, Dr. Voss replied without hesitation. The Kasari military philosophy is based on total domination. They don't recognize concepts like civilian immunity or proportional response. To them, showing mercy is showing weakness, and weakness invites destruction. Did Earth attempt conventional diplomatic solutions? For 18 months, we tried everything. Prisoner exchanges, ceasefire negotiations, even offering territorial concessions. The Kasari response was always the same. Complete surrender or complete annihilation. Dr. Voss turned to address the tribunal directly. The defendants didn't choose to fight a brutal war. They were forced to choose between fighting brutally or watching the species become extinct. The final phase of the trial included testimony from hundreds of witnesses. Survivors from human colonies, military personnel, and even some alien observers who had witnessed Kasari tactics firsthand. Captain Riley Jang, one of the few survivors from Kepler-7, testified about watching Kasari forces systematically destroy hospitals, schools, and civilian shelters. They didn't just kill us, she said, tears streaming down her face. They made sure we suffered first. Commander Alex Torres described the discovery of Kasari experimentation facilities on conquered worlds. They weren't just exterminating humans, he testified. They were studying us, learning how to kill us more efficiently. But perhaps the most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source. Ambassador Keelthura of the Centauri Republic, one of the species that had remained neutral during the war. I have served in galactic diplomacy for 60 years, the ambassador said, her crystalline voice resonating through the chamber. I have seen wars of conquest, wars of ideology, and wars of survival. This was different. She paused, her translucent form shimmering with emotion. The Kisari didn't want territory or resources. They wanted the complete erasure of humanity. When faced with extinction, any species will do whatever is necessary to survive. As the testimony concluded, the tribunal recessed for deliberation. Rosalie found herself in the station's observation lounge, staring out at the stars and thinking about everything she had heard. Hell of a thing, Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez said, joining her at the viewport. What is? Learning that following the rules can get you killed. Rosalie nodded grimly. The trial had revealed uncomfortable truths about the nature of war and survival. The Galactic Council's laws were written by species that had never faced true extinction, never been forced to choose between civilization and survival. Do you think they'll be convicted? Rodriguez asked. I don't know, Rosalie replied. The evidence is clear that they violated galactic law, but the context makes it impossible to judge them by normal standards, Rodriguez finished. The next morning, the tribunal reconvened for the verdict. The chamber was packed beyond capacity, with billions more watching the broadcast across known space. Chief Arbiter Zenthari Prime took its position at the central podium, its crystalline form reflecting the chamber's lights as it began to speak. This tribunal has considered all evidence presented regarding the charges against the human defendants, it began. The facts are not in dispute. The defendants did indeed violate multiple provisions of galactic law during their conflict with the Kisari hegemony. Rosalie felt her heart sink. If the facts weren't in dispute, the verdict seemed obvious. However, the arbiter continued, this tribunal must also consider the context in which these violations occurred. The evidence clearly shows that the defendants faced an enemy that recognized no limitations on warfare, no protections for civilian populations, and no possibility for negotiated settlement. The chamber was completely silent as the arbiter continued. The fundamental principle underlying galactic law is the preservation of civilized society. But when faced with an enemy committed to the complete destruction of your species, the choice becomes not between legal and illegal actions, but between survival and extinction. The arbiter paused, seeming to consider its words carefully. The defendants stand accused of becoming monsters to fight monsters. The question before this tribunal is whether such transformation is criminal when it is the only alternative to annihilation. Rosalie held her breath. After careful deliberation, this tribunal finds the defendants guilty of violating galactic law, but not guilty of war crimes. Their actions, while technically illegal, were driven by necessity rather than malice, by desperation rather than aggression. The chamber erupted in voices, some cheering, others protesting. The Kisari delegation hissed and growled their displeasure. The sentence of this tribunal, the arbiter continued when order was restored, is that the defendants be released with time served, but that they be prohibited from holding military command positions for a period of 10 standard years. General Cross stood as the arbiter addressed him directly. General Nathan Cross, this tribunal recognizes that your actions save human lives, but at the cost of violating the principles that separate civilization from barbarism. The galaxy must remember both the necessity of your choices and the tragedy that such choices became necessary. As the trial concluded and the defendants were released, Rosalie watched the aftermath unfold. The verdict had satisfied no one completely. Human supporters wanted complete exoneration, while other species called for harsher punishment. But perhaps, she thought, that was the point. The trial hadn't been about justice in any traditional sense. It had been about forcing the galaxy to confront uncomfortable truths about survival, morality, and the price of civilization. General Cross approached her as they prepared to board the transport home. Captain, he said quietly, thank you for bringing us here with dignity. Sir, I'm not sure the trial accomplished what anyone wanted. Cross nodded thoughtfully. Maybe not, but it accomplished something more important. It showed the galaxy that humans won't apologize for surviving. As the Defiance departed the Tribunal Station, Rosalie looked back at the crystalline structure one last time. The trial was over, but its implications would echo across the galaxy for years to come. Humanity had been judged not just for its actions, but for its refusal to accept extinction quietly. They had brought their defenders in chains, but those defenders had walked free, scarred perhaps, but unbroken. The galaxy had watched humanity's trial and learned a simple truth. When pushed to the edge of extinction, humans would do whatever was necessary to survive. They would follow the rules when possible, break them when necessary, and accept the consequences either way. It was, Rosalie realized, perhaps the most human response possible. To face judgment with dignity, accept responsibility for their choices, and emerge ready to face whatever came next. As Earth appeared on the view screen ahead, growing larger with each passing minute, she knew that humanity's place in the galaxy had changed forever. They were no longer the young species seeking acceptance. They were the species that had stared into the abyss and refused to blink. The trial was over, but humanity's story was just beginning.